Well, guys, it's that time again to talk about A Star is Born, the 1954 remake of the original 1937 classic. If you haven't seen my original review of the first film, go ahead and check that out and come back here and see how I compare them. With that said, let's get started with the review. A Star is Born was directed by George Cukor and stars Judy Garland and James Mason, and is the story of Esther Blodgett, an up-and-coming singer who falls in love with the daring and self-destructive movie star Norman Maine. And we see her career blossom as we see Norman Maine's career falter. If that sounds anything like what I said with the first film, it's exactly the first film. And honestly, that's why this film is honestly very disappointing. When I saw the 1937 film A Star is Born, I was blown away. I really enjoyed that film and thought it had a lot of great commentary about Hollywood, and I also just enjoyed the performances from Janet Gaynor and Frederick March. Everyone was terrific in that film, and I thought that film was just so good. And this film is also considered a classic, but I just couldn't get into this film at all. And it's really sad saying that. Yeah, the film is the exact same movie as the original, and there's little to no change. The only difference comes at the very beginning of the film, and that is that Esther Blodgett is a singer instead of a person that's trying to become a movie star. That's about it. As well as the movie is a musical. I say musical in quotation marks because it's not really a musical. It has musical numbers, but they're just songs written for Judy Garland, and that's it. She's the only one that sings in the movie, and I don't really call that a musical. In fact, this film, I've heard a lot of people talk about this was Judy Garland's comeback to film, and that's what this film feels like. It feels like a vehicle for Judy Garland to come back into movies, and that's really about it. It just feels lazy at times because there are just scenes that are completely ripped from the original film. Like, whole dialogue is taken from the original film to where this film barely has an original bone in its body. It's just the original film. If you've seen the original film, you've seen this film, and vice versa. There's little to no difference. But one big difference is the running time. The version I saw was about 3 hours long, and honestly, it was too long. The original film worked with a 2-hour runtime, and this just stretches that exact same story beat for beat, but stretches it so much that it becomes rather boring to watch and just not interesting at all. The musical scenes also take up a bunch of the time, but other than that, it just feels really stretched, and it didn't need to be. The version of the film I also saw was the restored version. Now, originally when this movie was released, it was released at about 3 hours, and this version is a little bit less. Apparently, there are scenes that haven't been found. And what that means is they're just completely missing. And there are moments in this film where there is audio playing of certain scenes, but there are no scenes. And instead they use still images. And it's really bad, and honestly, I just wonder why even add the scenes back in when you don't obviously have those scenes. It just feels lazy, and I just don't understand why they did it at all. Why even put it in there? Now, it might sound like I've been pretty negative with the film so far, which, I mean, I have. I have a lot of problems with this, but there are some bright spots, and I'll get into those. First off, I think the film looks really good. This was filmed in CinemaScope, and it shows. This is a very beautiful film. It's bright and colorful, and some of the ending shots of the film, especially near the climax, are gorgeous with some gorgeous sunset shots. And yeah, it's just a really good looking film. I never talked about the cinematography or anything with the original film because there really wasn't anything magical or just super impressive about the cinematography, but here it really does shine through. I also think that Judy Garland and James Mason are really good in this film. They do a terrific job. However, I think Judy Garland is, of course, the one that gets the spotlight in this film, and she's the one that people talk about. But honestly, I loved James Mason's performance a whole lot more in this film. James Mason is terrific, he's charming, and he just plays such a great self-destructive person as you just see this person go to the lowest of lows. And his performance reminds me a lot of Frederick March. In fact, it's very similar, and he has enough of his own style of acting to make it not a complete rip-off of that performance. He is really good in this film, and my favorite part, honestly. Judy Garland is also really good, but the way she performs, it's like she's trying to get an Oscar or something like that. It's just very Oscar baity, the performance, and that might be that this was basically a vehicle to get Judy Garland back in the spotlight. Honestly, I liked Janet Gaynor's performance in the first movie a lot more. She just had a type of innocence to her and such a likability to her. Like, I really wanted to root for her. And I thought that was because the film, the original I'm talking about, started her off at rock bottom and she works her way from the top. We don't really get that with Judy Garland's character in this one, and it's a shame because she just doesn't seem as interesting as Janet Gaynor's version. I still overall liked the film. I think it's got some good stuff with it. And, I mean, it's the exact same story, so there's really no problem with it, other than, I'm going to say the length is a big problem, and one of the reasons why this was so disappointing, of course, was because it just feels like a retread of everything we saw in the first film. And if I wanted to pick a version to watch, I'd honestly watch the 1937 version. This one is just too long and a little unfocused, and overall, there's just nothing about it that makes me want to see it again. I want to see the original Star is Born again, but this one, I can leave it behind. And with all that said, I'm going to give A Star is Born a 6 out of 10. Man, I really hated giving this one such a low rating. I mean, it's still a positive, but it's just so disappointing that this film just doesn't really have much of an identity. It's just not as good as that first one in my opinion. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this review. The next one I'll be reviewing in a few weeks is the 1976 version of A Star is Born starring Chris Christopherson and Barbra Streisand. I'm really interested in that film. But anyway guys, with all that said, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next review.